Now let's review the placing of crown molding in a typical room. The way I like to do it is, the wall that I start crowning first is the wall opposite the door that I walk into. I've made a small little cutout here using some relatively standard construction practices to make this a little bit easier. This is the crown we're going to be using. This is 3.5-inch crown molding, and I want to measure where this is going to drop onto the wall around the room, and this is how I do it. Take this piece of crown molding and set it up against the wall flat, and slide it until it touches the ceiling. So in this case, we're lying flat here and it's touched up against the ceiling, and put a small pencil mark in that spot. Now take a measurement and see how far that pencil mark comes. And we're at about 2 3/4 of an inch. I want to replicate that same mark all the way around the room. Make it a little easier. I'm just going to use an adjustable square. That was at 2 3/4 of an inch. So I'm going to set my square at 2 3/4 of an inch. And by placing this all the way around the room, I'm just going to place pencil marks all the way around. Now I'm putting pencil marks in here because I don't want to use a chalk line. You would think a chalk line would be a good idea, and it will provide a nice straight line, but you'll never get that chalk out of the paint when you paint. So a pencil line works really well. And I want you to do one more thing. Take some small finishing nails like these. These are 4-penny finishing nails. And every place that you put a pencil mark, I want you to put a nail. And it only needs to go into the drywall. What this pencil line is going to do is establish the place where the trim is going to sit. And it's also going to make it much easier for you to support your tape measure when you're measuring around the room. We've established where the trim is going to sit. The object now is to start putting trim on this first wall. Take your 2 pieces of trim, these inside corners. These are the ones that you made not long ago. So we put them like this. This is how they're going to go on the wall. The first piece of trim that you want to put on this wall would be your right inside corner. That's this piece of trim. That's also marked right inside corner. What you're going to do now is take this to your miter saw, and I'll show you how to cut your first piece of trim there. Now this is our piece of trim. Remember, it was our right inside corner. Here's our mark. That mark always goes up against the fence. In this case, it's at the bottom of the trim. So that's how it fits. We have to now align the saw. So I'm going to tilt the bevel to 33.9. And wherever we're doing 90-degree corners, the bevel always stays there. And you'll notice that what we've got to do is slide the miter to the left to match the cut. So this is exactly how the saw needs to be set up. I take my clean piece of trim, my new one, and as long as I match that trim the same way on the fence, again, bottom side up against the fence, I know that it's positioned correctly. So I'll slide this all the way to one end and make my cut. Now I'm fairly comfortable holding the trim in this spot, but if you're not, the nice part about using the miter saw flat is that you can use a clamp like this to hold it. So now that I've got it positioned correctly, let's cut the trim. Now we've made that first cut on this end, and now it's important to make this cut. Again, looking at your 2 sample pieces, this would be the corner you're cutting. In this case, it's the left inside corner. But I need to know what the measurement is across this. A lot of people would use a tape measure, and I'm not a real big tape measure fan, and I'll explain why. When you put the tape in one corner, you have to press it up into the other one and kind of guess where that tape is going to make the fold. It can make it sometimes a little tough, especially when you're measuring exact edges. I'm a big believer in the old folding rules. By taking a folding rule like this and sliding it up against one edge until it touches, and extending the slide on the opposite side, I can look and I have 31 inches here. I have 1 1/16 inches on that side, so I have 32 1/16 of an inch. It makes it really easy to measure. And now that I know that, I can take this piece of trim and on it mark 32 1/16 of an inch. Now to that trim, I'm going to add a 32nd of an inch. I just like to put a little plus on there so it kind of reminds me. Now here's the template for the other side of the wall. This is our left inside corner, and in this case, the mark is at the top of the trim. So what I want to do is position my saw to make that cut. We've left the bevel at 33.9, and you'll notice with the trim up against the fence, I have to slide the miter around to the opposite side so that this is the new cut. And by taking my piece of trim we've already cut, putting it back on the saw in the same direction the first one was on there, I'm all ready to make the cut. And I need to know now where the mark is going to be. The nice part is that at the wall, you mark this template with 32 inches and a 1/16 of an inch. And again, I like to add about a 32nd of an inch just to provide a little tension on that cut. Now that I've got it here, I measure from the outside end that I previously cut to the position on the trim here where the new cut's going to be made, and I have all of it done for me. It really makes using these templates simple. So we have 32 and a 1/16 of an inch on my folding rule. I set one edge to the end of the trim like this. I bring this out at 32 and a 1/16 right here, and I want to add about a 32nd of an inch, so there's my line. Now when you make this cut, it's sometimes hard to visualize about where that blade is going to come in and impact the trim. So my suggestion here is that you cut that a little bit fat to start with. That way, after you've cut it, you can kind of see how much you have to move it. After you've used the saw for a while, you get a little bit more comfortable in making these cuts. So let's make this first one, and we'll see where we are. And now we're showing us that we're fat. And then what I'll do is scoot it over and make another cut. And now I've got our piece cut. It's time to go fit it on the wall. Now I've got our piece cut. Let's get it in the opening here. See how it sits on these nails nicely. This fits pretty well. Normally I like to have this piece nice and tight. On a longer wall, I would have fitted one corner, pulled the piece of trim out a little bit to allow the other corner to go in, and when I push it in, it snaps in and actually holds it real well. It's a little bit tough to recreate on this small little cutaway. But you've got the idea here. And now let's put a couple nails in here to hold this together. Now you probably noticed that I didn't look for studs when I was nailing that piece of trim up there before. When you're using 3.5 inch trim like this, to be honest, you really don't have to. And let me show you why. On this cutaway, I'm going to put a piece of trim like this up in the corner, and you'll see how it sits on the wall. If I put a nail up through the corner of this, which is what I did, the nail goes into a double 2x4 on the ends. This is standard construction. You have 2x4 studs like this, and you have double 2x4s all the way around the room, over every door and every window. So by nailing through this corner, the nails will penetrate those studs every place. It's perfect. The only place that you won't have that ability is when you're doing bigger trim like this. And some of these get really large. A piece of trim sitting like this, a nail through this corner, has an awful lot of area between here and the wood stud. You may not be able to find a place to get a good purchase. So you may have to look for the vertical studs in this case, or provide a batten strip, a little wood batting all the way around the room to give you a little bit more wood surface area behind this piece of trim. And lastly, as long as we're talking about it, there's no need to nail up at the top of that trim. In fact, in many cases, you're going to find that the roof rafters or the ceiling joists are running parallel to those two walls, so there's nothing to nail to. The nails that you put in this edge will pull that piece of trim up nice and tight. And whatever irregularities you find there are going to be covered by caulk anyway. Now that we've got the first piece up on the wall, it's time to continue both other walls. I'll start on this side. You're taking your same pieces of trim like this. This is the piece you want to cut. We're going to go back to our miter saw again and do right inside corner. The bottom edge goes up against the saw just the same way that we did. And once you've cut it, this is how that piece of trim is going to sit up in that corner. We'll repeat the same thing for the other side, and as you walk around the walls, that's how you finish this. Now you've got all your trim nailed up. It's time to remove these positioning nails like this, and don't worry about the holes that are in there. They're going to be covered by caulk. In fact, I like to caulk these because as the studs and rafters have a tendency to push the drywall or plaster away, you get some unevenness between the edge of this trim and the ceiling, and caulk takes up for that. A small tip of the caulk is plenty. Don't really cut it back. I'm going to put a small bead between the wall and the bottom of the trim, like this, and do the same at the opposite end. I like to try and do about as much as I can reach when I'm sitting on a ladder. And then clean up that trim. I like to keep a little pail of water there, wet my fingers, and just push that caulk right into the openings. Now also, while you're here, any of the excess caulk here before you wipe it off, you can take that and then put that in each one of those little nail holes as you work your way around the room. Nail holes, if they're fairly deep, may dry a little bit and pull some of that caulk in. You may have to go back and touch it up, but it's a great way to work your way around the room and provide a great surface after which you're going to paint. Just a perfect way to put caulk up and trim.